We can find ways to show how you can use technology in positive ways and make money. Everyone is going to support. And the truth is, the world isn't always fair.
That's true.
The truth is that you fail. Empathy and compassion for other humans.
On that last note, regarding autonomous cars.
The biggest threat to mankind is when its technology outstrips its humanity. Reekolect was one of those companies that defined online marketplaces.
All right, and welcome back to the Digital Legacy Podcast. My name is Daniel Sanchez, CEO of Reekolect, and I'm here today with a very, very special guest with us today. His name is Blair LaCorte. Blair, thank you so much for joining today. How are you doing today?
I'm great, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Blair, whenever we get started with the podcast and we have a guest like yourself, we like to start off with a little bit of introduction to give the audience just a little bit of idea of who you are and some of your accomplishments. So I'll go ahead and read off a little bit here. Now, CEO of AEye led the development of the industry's only software configurable LiDAR, impacting automotive and industrial markets. Innovative leadership, recognized as one of the top 100 most influential leaders in transportation and automotive. NASA Innovator of the Year, honored for contributions to GIS software and other technological innovations. And Space Enthusiast, investor in Moon Express and Virgin Galactic, with plans for space travel as an astronaut-in-training. And then here, a little bit about his diverse executive experience, which, if you can elaborate a little bit here, Blair, held roles in PRG. PRG being?
Sure. Many people may not have heard of PRG, Production Resource Group, but it was the group that actually put on about 80% of the concerts in the world last year. We do most of the Broadway shows, the Olympics, the Super Bowl, the CMAs, the AMAs, anything that's really a live event. It's a neat business because it melds that live human experience with how technology can actually help people connect.
Wow.
But, behind the scenes, but very, very fun business.
Phenomenal. Going down the list, what about XOJET?
So XOJET, for you private aviation enthusiasts, was the first and the fastest growing wholly owned airline for private charter. So a lot of the derivatives in the business model today, where you can buy a seat on a jet or you can buy a standard package on a jet, came from the basic beginnings of XOJET. Now XOJET Vista, I think, is the largest in the world for private jets.
Very impressive. And also TPG.
Yeah, I didn't notice, but I think I have a lot of past experience with initials. TPG is Texas Pacific Group, and in the private equity world, it's one of the largest private equity firms. Most people would recognize the companies that we owned. We started up Ryanair. We owned Continental Airlines. We bought IBM and merged it together to create Lenovo. We owned Neiman Marcus, Burger King. We did the largest investment in Uber, Airbnb. So really investing pension money into innovative companies so that we can get a return for retirees.
Wow, very impressive, absolutely. And then we have here VerticalNet and Savvy Technologies, Autodesk, and Sun Microsystems.
Yeah, we're going way to the past. VerticalNet was one of those companies that defined online marketplaces. So if you think about back in 1999, it was the largest set of industrial marketplaces in the world. We were the number one IPO in 1999, believe it or not, way back in the past. And Savvy was a company that we were the first boots in the ground in Afghanistan and Iraq. We repurposed a bunch of our technology for force deployment and logistics and help protect our troops and save some lives. So Autodesk, for anyone who's an engineer out there, is the largest CAD software company. I think we were the fourth largest software company in the world at one point. And if you're an engineer, you would have used one of our CAD systems. And Sun Microsystems, sadly, is now part of Oracle. But at the time, Sun Microsystems, which actually stood for Stanford University Network, Scott McNealy was one of the pioneers. We invented the workstation and also Java and a lot of the other technologies that the internet is based on today.
Wow. Very impressive, very impressive. Well,
I didn't start any of them, so let's just be clear.
No, absolutely.
I can explain all of them, but a lot of people call me a serial entrepreneur, and the reality is that I have worked with serial entrepreneurs really never started anything, but always found that helping people to take their vision to the next level is probably my best skill.
Absolutely. I'm sure very instrumental in optimizing the overall business operation. And
Well,
taking it
that's
to
what
the
I
next
tell
level.
people. I was very instrumental.
There you go. Absolutely. Well, Blair, again, thank you so much for joining us here. So, Blair, I now that we have a little bit more about some of your accomplishment and what you've done, every time we have a guest here, I like to deep dive a little bit deeper so the audience can know you a little bit more about how it started. At what point did you, during your, let's say, childhood, teenage years, tell me a little bit about yourself, what your personality was, where you started to really see the world through your scope and your perspective?
Sure. And, we know each other. We've known each other before this podcast, and I know your passion for learning and for growing and for entrepreneurship. I would say probably the thing that impacted me the most was I had two parents who were entrepreneurs. And they were divorced, and they lived in the next town across from each other, and they were two very different businesses. One was an asset-based business, was a little ragtag airline with my stepfather and my mother. So asset businesses are all about you better use those assets or you go bankrupt.
Of course.
And my dad had a recruiting business where he used to hire all of the wives in the neighborhood who didn't have jobs to help him do staffing and recruiting. Wow. Very different business, a service business where it's all about velocity and how much you can charge for each person that you recruit. So I got to see at a very, very early age the foundations of two very different types of businesses. And you overlay that on top the terror of being part of an entrepreneurial business because you're always worried, are you going to make the rent? So my childhood was really one of learning how to actually help.
Wow.
Right? So what could I do to keep these businesses going so that, I had 8 brothers and sisters and those 2 combined families. And so we were a tribe. And, it profoundly affected me to the point where, I know everyone wants to believe that we have a path and that we can control the world. I actually reacted the opposite way to that. Like I never want to be an entrepreneur. I never want to be in a business like this. So I got into University of Maine for business. And then when I got out of school, my dad said, make sure that you get into a good training program. I went to General Electric, which at the time, IBM for sales and General Electric for finance, 2 of the best training programs. And then when I got done with my training program, I actually went back and got an MBA at Dartmouth in business. So I spent as much time as I possibly could trying to believe that, you could actually figure out business by learning business skills. And what I learned, over the next 40 years was that, business is an apprentice sport. And it really is how to get in there and work with people who are going to teach you things. Not saying the business skills don't help, they absolutely help. But without the mentors that I had along the way, I don't think the business skills matter.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, I can definitely understand it. I think everyone has to have a mentor. That's some person that's in a position where you want to be that can guide you, at least give you that experience that we all long for and want to understand. So
or tell you the truth. And the truth is the world isn't always fair.
That's true.
The truth is that you fail. The truth is that you're going to be sad some days and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And that's the truth. But there's a big gulf between, you family who loves you but may not know what you do every day, and the people you work with that you're not close enough that they feel like they can be vulnerable with you to tell you the truth. And to me, that's the bridge a mentor gives you. And it don't have to have one mentor. You can have many mentors you learn from. And in fact, some mentors, it's constructive trauma, right? You actually, they're telling you stuff and you're watching stuff and you learn from them, not necessarily because they're telling you the right thing to do, but you can see that it's the wrong thing to do. So my dad had this saying, he was salt of the earth kind of guy, and he said, look, stop worrying about the outcome. Sometimes you're learning, sometimes you're earning. So sometimes you're doing your best work and you're not making any money, but you're learning, and sometimes you get lucky and you're making a lot of money because you had learned something before. But he said the key to life is not to burn. Because once you either burn out your body or your mind or your relationships, the game's over.
That's true.
Right? So keep yourself in that zone. And I look at mentors as, coaches, right? Either good coaches or bad coaches that can keep you moving along that track.
Absolutely. And touching a little bit on your father and your mother. So you mentioned they were both entrepreneurs. Who do you feel whose characteristics, traits did you have in what aspect of your life when it came to business? Did you adopt some sort of negotiating skills through your father or your mother? That's what I mean by that.
Yeah, I think my father what I learned from him was the humanity, that business is just a sport, and that underneath business is your family and your friends and yourself. And it very clear to me that you can play a game and win, but you can walk off the field and, destroy yourself. There's guys who are great athletes and then they go and drink all night because they can't live with who they are, because they're doing something that they don't like or in a way that they don't like. And so I think I really learned from him that there is no separation between yourself. And if you think about it from an athlete's standpoint, if you have an athlete that doesn't rest or recover from an injury, or you have an athlete that doesn't get along with the other players on the field, that athlete won't be successful. Right. But when you talk to someone in business and you ask them, how much time do you put self-care in? And did you tell people that you needed to take this weekend off, or that you needed to do something differently? And very rarely does anyone in business want to say that they need to take time off or that they need to take care of themselves. And then when you ask people in business, you say, well, what are your relationships and how do you manage those relationships? They tend to all be driven around the tasks. You may like someone at work, but you don't develop relationships in a way that is actually nurturing, where you have to actually decide who you can trust and who you can't trust. And so, for me, that was a great lesson. My mother was hilarious and funny and, relentless. But again, this is back to telling the truth, right? So that we all have this thing about what people know about us and what we let them know about us. Right. So if I said to you, you heard my background, you say, wow, this is great. 2 entrepreneurs, and he got into business and he's done all these things. He's been in different industries. Yeah, well, my stepfather was a violent alcoholic, right? But my mother knew that he would not drink if he was flying the next day. So guess what she became extremely good at? Booking flights.
All the time.
All the time, so he wouldn't drink. Did that affect me? Absolutely affected me. But also, I learned from that, how to watch and listen when there are people who are dysregulated. So I'm very good in a crowd, right? When there's a company meeting or something, watching to see what's happening. Because when you're dealing with an alcoholic that has these kind of tendencies, you can see the triggers.
Immediately,
right? So, I think that we all, have people in our lives. Now, sometimes it's not always our parents, but it's someone else. But what I've learned in retrospect is how to embrace those and how to actually use those to find, who your authentic, self is. And sometimes it's easier to watch a Hallmark movie and know what the ending's going to be. But sometimes you have to be surprised. You have to watch a drama and then maybe there's a twist in it and be able to recover from that.
I agree. And a little bit on that, because I know you mentioned here in your list of compliments, you mentions you being a space enthusiast. Did that come from your stepfather and that process and growing up and flying with him? Or where did you create that desire for space?
Whoever you believe God is or what the spiritual energy is, I was cursed because I said, my dad was a recruiter and I saw how hard he worked. Recruiting, you have to understand people, but you also have to sell. You're always selling companies and you're getting new jobs. And I said, I'm never going to be a recruiter. That's tough work. It takes a real skill to be able to do that. And when I was at TPG, one of my side jobs was I managed all the recruiters for all of our companies. And just as funny as that is I said I would never be in the aviation business because it's a really tough business, getting up at 4 o'clock, making sure that the maintenance has been done, warming stuff up, things break and stuff. And later on in life, I got, put in charge of an airline. But the space thing was something very personal to me because I was always intrigued with space, but I always was very conservative because I felt like, people say growing up poor is difficult. I don't think it's difficult in a lot of ways because you have people you're dependent on and they help you. What's difficult about it is that you have to make suboptimal decisions because you can't take risk. And so I noticed I became very conservative in how I took risk. And so Richard Branson was raising money for Virgin Galactic, and I had XOJET, and we were doing a partnership. And I said, they said, well, listen, you should get in on this. You should come to space with us. We're going to be in space in 3 years. This was 15 years ago. And I said, you know what? I'm about to say no. Because number one, I'm frugal and cheap, and it's a lot of money. And number two, what do I want to? I know. And I thought this is a perfect example of something I should do to create cognitive dissonance. It's something I wouldn't have done. And I said, you know what? I am going to do this because on the surface, I'm saying I don't want to. And in fact, it turned out to be one of the most impactful decisions of my life. Because although I still haven't gone into space, and I'll probably be going in the next year to 18 months. Through that period of building the spaceship, and we lost the spaceship and funding it and taking it public, I've met so many people that have enriched me because they're very different than me. And so sometimes, I decided to take that decision because I thought I needed to do something that was going to be scary for me. And in essence, by taking that risk, it completely changed my life.
Wow. Do you see that same curiosity in Richard as well when you speak with him about space? Like, how does he feel about space when you've had conversations with him?
Well, I mean, he's always been about breaking boundaries.
Right. I've seen that in his documentaries.
And
so, right.
he's so different
Yeah,
than
the hot
me.
air balloon.
Yeah, oh
and
my God. And
so many different things.
He raced tried to do the fastest boat across the Atlantic. He did the balloons. He's hiked up mountains that no one's ever hiked up before. So it's really interesting that we've been friends, and I go to visit twice a year to his island and bring the kids. And, over the years, he is, there's two things that always strike me about him. One is his relentless curiosity and need to test his bounds. And the second is his actual empathy and compassion for other humans. And I think that's one of the reasons that he has been so successful, is that there's a lot of people who achieve a lot. And then there's a lot of people who are very compassionate, but he does both. And when he changes that mode, when he gets down and all of a sudden you're talking to him and he gets down on, his knees and he starts, taking your shoe and shining it and saying, well, if you do this deal, I'll shine your shoes. It's just unexpected.
Right.
But it reminds you that there's humanity there. And I love that ability to go back and forth because you see the whole person, right? And if we have time, one of the things that would be interesting to talk about is the jury box, which is a psychological framework for how people think, and then how that applies to what we're doing with AI today. Because it is really the difference between humans and AI, because humans, this whole idea of either showing who they are or discovering who they are is antithetical to what AI is, and why humans always have something to add when they're dealing with other humans, because you'll never get that kind of connection with a form of AI. It's just it's very different.
I think this is a great time to go ahead and pivot and dive a little bit into AI. So, as mentioned in your accomplishment, was discussing it, you being a CEO of AEye, that's, with a capital letter A and then IEYI. Tell me a little bit about AI and logistics and in the automotive industry.
So great name.
Yes.
Because every time you said it, you have to say AI.
You have to.
And,
right.
There's a whole, you know this because you've been in branding a long time. There's this whole USP, right? Yeah. Unique selling proposition in the 1950s, and the advertisers came out and tried to figure out how to get those messages embedded in your brain. And so we actually, the differentiation for our LiDAR system, for people who don't know what LiDAR is just a laser, right? And we found in 1964 that if you used a laser on a gun, specifically the Mark II, you could target something much, much further than a human could target something. Mm-hmm. So LiDARs were really, there's been lasers for a long time, but LiDARs were really invested in as ways to detect distance, starting in the early 60s. And they're very different than, and one of the great, stories is Elon Musk with Tesla, right? Why he didn't use LiDAR and he's used radar and cameras. But one of the things that we had been great at was we had developed systems for all of our military jets. When you're going very, very quickly and someone's shooting at you and you want to be able to shoot that thing down, humans actually are not able to discern distance. What we do is we guess. And it was an evolutionary kind of thing if you biomimic the human eye. That's why funhouse mirrors can mess us up so much. Right. Because, all of a sudden you can't tell what's going on. What we do is we look at size and then we calculate how far away do we think something is because of the size of the thing, and we guess. The problem is that when you're moving very quickly, you have to make decisions very quickly, and radar goes very, very far, but it bounces off of metal and it can't tell you exactly what's there. And cameras have a lot of distinction, but they can be blinded by the sun. And, after 50, 100 feet, they're not really good. So lasers in the military were always what we used to triangulate with cameras. And so our LiDAR actually was able to use AI and algorithms on the edge of the network to do something that humans could never do, which is pre-calculate and change the scan pattern, right? We do it in our brain, but we were never able to do it for long distances. And so it was one of the first real breakthroughs in how to use AI in a way that would increase safety. So almost everyone's car, even if you don't have a LiDAR system in it yet, is starting to use these algorithms on how to actually predict and prevent. Right. So we would always say, we spent a lot of years with LiDAR to find things to hurt, to kill. And now we are using that same technology to find things not to hurt, like to get the child running across the road, or to find an animal that's going to get hit by the car and how to figure out how to navigate around it. So we've done the first generation of LiDAR. 10 companies went public. You will see the second generation coming, and everything is about to change. Unfortunately, or you could say fortunately, because good competition drives better results, is the Chinese understood this, and we were maybe decades in front of the Chinese. And now, if you Google Chinese cars, all of them have a LiDAR in them. So American cars, only a few. But the Chinese realized that if this was the next generation, the best way to get to improvements is to start using it.
Start using LiDAR.
Right? So we're still in that phase of it's just on the edge, and we're going to get everything perfect before we start to use it. But almost every Chinese car that comes off the lot. So you have to actually respect competition.
Of course.
Or you can't actually find a way forward.
I agree. And I've also heard that they're now equipping drones with LiDAR to go ahead and be able to scan landscape. Like, very interestingly, I've seen recently in certain documentaries, they're scanning the Amazon with these LiDAR technologies.
It's unbelievable.
And finding, remnants of civilizations and things like that, which is absolutely incredible.
It's fascinating. And, the thing about a LiDAR is it's so fast. It's obviously moving at the speed of light, right? So that you ask yourself, why can they fly over that jungle and they can see beneath it? It's because there's so many shots, 4 or 5 million shots happening so quickly that as the leaves move, it's actually getting below the leaves. So it's bringing back the information. So
it can penetrate through the vegetation.
It can penetrate through the vegetation, but it's going to help with everything, because it is one of those. The human biology is amazing, and when you buy a mimic, you have to figure out what a computer or an AI system that could actually do better than us. And this visualization is something that they can do better than us, because it can detect things farther and faster and with exact distance, and it can process it faster. So we will be using, in our everyday life, we're going to be using more and more lasers, because it's just like a bionic eye.
Very impressive, very impressive. On that last note, regarding autonomous cars, what's your opinion on that, and where do you see it going? Will we one day be able to just simply call in our cars, get picked up, drive somewhere without any issues? I know Tesla's achieved this, but where do you see the technology really, evolving to and progressing?
So really, today it's a business model issue, not a technology issue.
Okay.
So we could do it today. Now you can argue, can Waymo really roll it out? Why is Waymo only doing it inside the city and they're not doing it on highways yet? It's really just business model. So it's a matter of time. But what you have seen, and again, you will see, as I alluded to earlier, is there's things called ADAS systems, auto assist systems that, I'm changing lanes, and, that I can see something in the lane.
Right.
Those aren't full autonomy, but those are already being built into every car. And cars are being designed 7 years in advance, so you will see a lot of autonomous features in it. And, a lot of people have issues with the way that Tesla went about it, but it was very pragmatic from a business model. They knew that LiDAR systems were better. They also knew that it was $10,000 per LiDAR system, and no one was ever going to put 3 of these things on a car and buy the car. So they decided to actually focus on cameras and radar. And the funny story about it is that, it makes sense, if the camera and the radar agree, even though they both have their weaknesses, you got a 99.9% chance that you saw something. The problem that Tesla was having was that when they did disagree, then you had to stop, right? And you didn't know what to do at that point. And that's why Tesla actually pulled out the radars, because their cameras are getting good enough that one modality is better than having 2 that disagree. So we're already there. I mean, you're going to see it in the industrial space. Like, you see autonomous mining trucks. I mean, why wouldn't you do that? Right? Because there's, you don't want people out there.
Absolutely.
And it's too expensive. So we've already, as Arnold Schwarzenegger would say, I've already succeeded in my mind. Now is the physical motions. We're already there. It's just the business models will drive it out.
Phenomenal.
Now, again, we're as an investor in Uber, we never should have been in autonomous cars. That was a mistake.
Right.
Because back to unique selling propositions, the unique selling proposition for those of you who are at my age, you're a little younger, was when you first got in an Uber car and that driver came around and opened your door and he offered you a water, you felt special.
You did. Right.
And so saying that we were going to replace the drivers, now that's not that it's not going to happen someday, and that had voted for the fact that we should actually build the technology and allow our drivers that will fund it and allow them to put it on their cars, and then they can have their cars driving at night. But saying that we were going to replace our drivers with autonomous cars, I did not think was the way to go. It was going to happen fast enough, and that's the worst thing to do is alienate your primary source of income.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Last two questions quickly on AI, Blair, just before we move on. Two questions that are very commonly asked that people want to know about the guests that we have here. Number one of the biggest fears that people have is AI taking over jobs. What's your opinion on that? What industries do you think next will be taken over? And that fear that people have now with new autonomous robots that are going to be used and pretty much in the next few years in household and so much. What's your opinion on that?
Look, this has been the fear since technology was invented. Now, I'll digress to a philosophical state is that, look, I'm going to say that I am primarily a Luddite, and I have fought technology most of my life. I don't necessarily I haven't used a computer in 10 or so years. But I appreciate it, and I've run some big technology companies. And I believe that, if you really go back to the beginning, technology was really based on human insecurity. Now, people are going to get very upset. Why? Why is he picking on technology? Because what we use technology for, we weren't the fastest, we weren't the prettiest, we weren't the strongest animal, and we used to, freeze to death. And so we started to invent things that actually could control our environment. And we became very good at two things. One was inventing things, and the other was pushing them through a tribal network so that they could be standardized. And so we have had great success over the last couple thousand years. Now you can argue if you watch those shows of ancient aliens that sometimes we lose our technology and then we figure it out again. Right. But we've been very good at applying technology to control our environment, to the point where there was a study done at one point 20 years ago that said technology had a higher Q rating than religion, which was astonishing at the time because we believed in it so much, that in its goodness. But like every strength becomes your biggest weakness, the challenge has come in the last 50 years, as Einstein's bastardized quote said, the biggest threat to mankind is when its technology outstrips its humanity. And he's been right. When you start to believe that you're in so much a control that you forget that there's humans behind everything, that's a problem. So now let's go back to your question. Do I think technology will replace jobs? Absolutely. Just the same way that mechanization replaced jobs, right? And then automation replaced jobs. And now, whatever you call AI, now whether you call AI an algorithm or you call it reinforcement learning or something, there are going to be things that technology is going to be better at than we were, and jobs will shift. So the question is replacing or pushing jobs into different areas, and what's the friction?
Right.
And that's what's, that's the big fear. I think it's inevitable, right? So I think that what we have to think about is, how we deal with it, and because it's going to be here. And also, when people say, will it be used for good and evil? Of course it will. Why? Because humans are good and evil.
Of course.
Right?
Every piece of technology is used that way.
And so we'd like to believe we're in control of nature, and we'd like to be in control of other humans, but I'm married to a psychotherapist. I don't want to burst any bubbles or tell you there isn't a Santa Claus, but we're all messed up. And the fact is that if you go to the basic need of humans, the basic needs, like there's this book, I learned everything I needed in kindergarten. I want to write a book someday, which is I learned everything I needed in junior high school, which is we're tribal. Okay, and so the biggest issue with us is safety. And the biggest issue with us is safety within other people. So when you look at fear, most of our fears, even social comparison fear, are tribal. Why is social comparison tribal? Because if you were an animal and you were in a pack and you were the worst, they would either kill you, kick you out of the pack, or you'd be killed during the next,
weakest link, right.
the weakest link. So these are all natural reactions to our environment. And what technology has been doing has been making us feel more secure. And what happens is everything goes through cycles. So the more that technology became the answer, and it was a Q-score, and I'm not making a pitch for spirituality or religion one way or the other, but knowing more about humans than technology, which is what religion was and spirituality was all about, sometimes that's the key. And so we're going through a time right now where we're having to grapple with that technology may not be good. It may cause depression. It may cause alienation. And and we will get through it with some pain and with some friction, but it's not going backwards, right? It's going to go forward. So what I would challenge everybody on the podcast to do is think, let's get to the good things faster. Because one thing has been proven with humans is that they love things that taste good and they love things that make them money, right? And so if we can find ways to show how you can use technology in positive ways and make money, everyone is going to support that technology, which is one of the reasons I was really intrigued with Reekolect, because there's a different way of looking at how to make connection, right? Instead of looking at FOMO, which is what is everyone doing now, and am I doing stuff with them, so am I part of the tribe? It was geared towards how do I look backwards and realize that there's a legacy in my family and in my history and in my ethnicity that is actually calming.
Absolutely.
Because back to this idea of fear, and I won't go too far into the science of it, but one of the things I do now is I sit on I'm the vice chair of the Buck Institute, so #1 institute on longevity. But in order to study longevity, you have to study what upsets humans and what kills them and what makes them age. And it turns out that what makes us age is chronic inflammation. And the biggest cause of chronic inflammation is not external, it's internal. It's when we don't feel safe and we don't feel connected to other humans. So this whole idea of going backwards and saying, I have a place, is more than just a fun scrolling. It's a sense of peace. And when you look at humans, there are two things. If you read the book Homo Sapiens, there's two things that have helped us in some ways conquer the world, because one of them is that our parasympathetic nervous system is very different than most other mammals. Mammals, all of them have it, but the vagus nerve connects to your brain and your mouth biome and your stomach and all your organs. And when you look at it, most of the traffic that goes is not your body telling your brain what's happening. It's your brain telling your body what it wants it to do and whether it's safe or not. So chronic inflammation and chronic stress is 80% of it is coming from the way that you look at the world and the way you perceive the world, right? So again, a lot of people don't want to hear this positive thinking is important, but it is important in the sense that if you believe you have an internal locus of control and you believe that someone loves you and you'll still be okay at the end of the day, that actually impacts your health.
I agree.
And your longevity by definition.
Absolutely. I can definitely relate to that. I think us feeling that love, that support really does determine our actions. And again, much like you said, how we perceive the world and everything we get involved into. And absolutely. And touching back on Reekolect, Blair, and thank you so much for that insight. One of the last questions we want to ask you regarding our concept of wanting to preserve memories, preserve our legacy, and also looking back into where we come from and who we are. When it comes to AI avatars, do you believe that humans have the ability to build a connection with an AI avatar, an emotional connection with the avatars?
Okay, so there's going to be a little bit of argument on this, but if you get down to the science of it, the reality is that there was a study done. If you talk to yourself, is that healthy or not? Well, you got to be careful. But if you talk to yourself because you're reinforcing yourself, your brain does not know the difference between you talking to yourself and someone else talking to you. So I ran one of the, on the board and at one point ran one of the largest coaching associations, Positive Coaching Alliance for Youth, right? Because when you look at where you need to get to install values, the church goes for people 8 to 12, schools 8 to 12, and youth sports has that same audience. So we spent a lot of time trying to get positivity into this. And one of the studies that we did at Stanford showed that for every negative comment that you make to a child under stress, you need somewhere, depending on who the child is, between 6 and 9 comments on the positive side to overcome that. So we like to think of ourselves as, okay, we're adults and I'm going to give you some constructive criticism, or I'm going to yell something at you and you're going to be able to integrate it into your action. And it's not that you can't actually coach and tell people what they did wrong, but if you put it in a negative context, it's actually going to impact those kids. And it takes a long way to get them back. Again, I look at that the same way I look at Reekolect. If that's the case, that you can actually say things to yourself that can actually overcome that, your confidence. Part of Reekolect's mission, I think, is to actually remind us. And avatars, you can't tell the difference between an avatar telling you the things that you believe and a human at some point. It goes into your subconscious. You can tell the difference consciously, but take a look at, it's just a positive thing. This isn't a negative thing like we're talking to a robot. This is being reminded, which is what religion was. Let's read this book, Quran or Bible. Let's be reminded of things. And if an avatar can help you when you don't have access to a human, or it can actually give you that feeling of safety that you're with someone that you love, and you can be reminded of that. And in fact, if we can put some structured questions in so your memories can be played back, I think that's like taking a sauna. It's very good for you.
Absolutely.
Right? It clears the soul and cleans the soul. Now, if everything that's a strength can be a weakness. If you're depending on that and not the real world completely, then that obviously is going to become delusional.
That's what
right. But things. My dad would always say, look, I can help you up, but I can't hold you up. And the reasoning for that is if I hold you up all the time, the second I turn around to do something else, your legs aren't strong enough, you're not going to be able to stand.
You're gonna fall,
right?
right?
But if I can go back, and my dad's been passed away, it'll be 20 years in April. I miss him every day. You notice how many times I've mentioned my dad. I mention my dad every day. Why? Because in my brain, when I mention him and I tell his stories, he's alive in my heart. And so if we can find a way through Reekolect to bring back what we used to have when you lived in the same village and you had multiple generations and they told stories of what came before you, then that is food for the soul. Absolutely. Right? Now, if I believe that that everything that is past is present, okay, that's a little delusional.
Agreed. Well, absolutely. Well, Blair, thank you so much for that insight. You really position what Reekolect is not only our mission, but what we're striving to do with our technology, not in any way, shape, or form wanting to replace humans, but again, reminding us of our roots, of our past, of who we are, and as well as looking forward as well. Our goal is to also be able to design digital avatars of ourselves to be able to leave to our grandchildren and so on, and really build that digital legacy, hence what we do. But thank you so much for that incredible insight, not only into your career in AI, but as well as what you feel about Reekolect. One little last point I'd like to leave for our entrepreneurs that do watch the show. For entrepreneurs that are up and coming right now, that are dealing with challenges, that want to persevere, but have to deal with so much, whether it be family, whether it be competition, is there any one little piece of advice, any gold nugget that you can provide to them to be able to make it through the other side?
Sure. Well, I'll give you a quote from one of my good friends, Dutch, who was my Master Chief in SEAL Team 6. Listen, embrace the suck, because humans were not designed to not have stress. Okay, this is how we were designed. You can't grow unless you have cognitive dissonance, right? Your brain, your neuron connections don't grow unless you're uncomfortable and you push yourself beyond what you're doing today. Your muscles can't grow unless you do muscle confusion and you push them and you rip them. So part of what you're experiencing as an entrepreneur is that you've decided to be one of the elite, right? You've decided to push yourself into a place that's going to grow you. And go back to my dad saying, this is really, you can have people help you up, but you've got to hold yourself up. And so it's really about how quickly you can overcome things that other people would not be able to, because that's what an entrepreneur does. We all have a vision, but we're pivoting on micro levels every day. And we're being, there's negative input that can come in at any given time, and loneliness and things like that. So I'm not saying that you go down with the ship, but I am saying that if you're going to be a champion, then it's taking one step at a time, being able to absorb it. One of the things we would do when I was in college, and we were ahead of the game for even Division I, is we would jump rope and we'd bring our heart rate up, and then we'd time, how quickly we could get it back to normal. Now, people do that all the time. No one did that back then. Why did we do that? Because it's the ability to cope with stress. And we knew that the faster we brought down, then our ability to cope with stress, we could go do it again. So I will leave the entrepreneurs with, that's the reality. You pick to be an elite athlete, and that most entrepreneurs, I was part of the Kairos Foundation. So we gave we top 30 college entrepreneurs in the world, and it was David Rockefeller, myself, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, all the top leaders in the world. And so what we said is that everyone needs a mentor, because again, we went earlier that you need to learn from other people. And secondarily is most entrepreneurs, even if they fail one or two times, will succeed. And when we look back over the last 15 years of picking the top 30 entrepreneurs, we didn't know when they were going to win, but was it their second business, their third business, or their fourth business? But they've all come out of it and won because they embraced entrepreneurship, not the single idea that they had. You just never know. Sometimes you have bad timing, sometimes you have bad luck. But again, if you're learning, eventually you're going to win and you're going to earn. So, that's what I would say. Think of yourself as an elite athlete and you pick this life. This is a lifestyle, not necessarily a point in time.
Absolutely. Very well put. All right. Well, Blair, thank you so much. This podcast has been incredible. We really appreciate you here joining with us. And until next time, thank you very much, everyone. And enjoy yourself, and we'll catch up soon.